What is up, ladies and gents? Noli here, and welcome back to another Prophecy tier list video. Today we're taking a look at the units. Again, I would love it if you guys checked out the link in the description down below and made your own tier list. Big thank you to Woody for creating this amazing resource. On this channel, I think the most important thing is always going to be discussion when it comes to the meta. And so if you guys can link your own tier list down in the description below, and I can sort of collect the data, that would really help me out here, because I'm going to throw out my opinions. It's going to be a little more informal than the leader video, where I'd really set my ideas in stone. There's only 10 of them, so it's much easier to do that, but there's a lot of subjectivity here. So it's tough to say exactly how characters compare. Again, I'm going to be going from left to right, saying this character is better than this character, but sometimes it's so marginal that it's basically impossible to make those assertions. So what I'd love is to share with you guys, and for you guys to share back and give me more of an overall idea, so my next tier list is more rounded and not just coming from my anecdotal evidence. So without further ado, I want to get straight into it, but just quickly, I want to explain my tiers. So A is the focal point of balance. These are characters that are fine in any composition. A plus are characters that really excel in particular compositions and are fine in every other. And then if we start looking down at the lower tiers, B plus, B, these are characters who need particular setups to really function at their best. They need particular items, or they need certain traits to exist or not exist. So for example, anti-heal. Some characters are really good when anti-heal is not in the game, and they may well be up here in A plus S. But I'm going to sort of base this tier list off the law of averages and how often that happens, and how often they are actually just countered and feel like really rough pickups. So let's get into it. We're going to start with Achilles, going straight through in alphabetical order. Achilles goes straight into A+. He's a really good character. He offers an execute, which is great when you're a tanky comp. It's also great when you're dealing with tanky comps, because he executes at 40% health. His ability then resets, meaning you get into ridiculously strong chains. Number of times I've seen Achilles deal top damage just because of his execute. But another thing that I think people ignore with Achilles is the fact that he does a lot of damage with his ability. Even if it doesn't kill, it's a strong ability. He casts it very frequently. He has a low mana pool, and like I say, the resets obviously make it even more powerful. Probably the only problem is it's got a fairly lengthy animation time, during which he's not CC immune, so he can be cancelled out of it. But even so, I've found that Achilles has more often than not saved me in situations than he's failed me. So next up we have Agni. I think a lot of people put him in their number 1 spot, and I'm not going to argue with you there. He's definitely up in S tier. He has some of the best AoE damage in the game. He does a ton. Often, if you get Agni's ult off, you win the fight. It's simple as that, and that means he's S tier. But he does have some slight drawbacks. He requires a lot of mana to get his ultimate off, so if you don't have any mana traits, he can sometimes feel a little bit like dead weight. And also, if the opponent's team does survive his meteorites, say they have a lot of vigor and you don't have anti-heal, they're all going to have their ultimates, because it hits in such a large radius. So you can end up with a lot of blowback on the other end. I think Agni is such a strong character, but while he fits in pretty much any comp and you would like to see him, there are times where you just have to pass over him because you don't have enough mana. So I think in some respects he's overrated. He's definitely not an S plus character, and he has received a slight negative adjustment. He probably needs another small negative adjustment, but not too much, because they could easily kill this character off. And legendary characters are much easier to kill off in terms of viability, because they're much more expensive and much rarer, harder to find. Next up we have Alpwatch. I'm putting him in right behind Achilles. He's a character I value really highly. I think he's amazing at dealing with hunters thanks to his disarms. The number of 1v1s I've won because of Pwatch's disarms are through the roof. The character's incredibly good with lots of different items. A lot of people automatically default to Ankh, which is good, but there are other great synergies because his zombies apply on-hit effects. Really, really strong character, and one that I prioritize more than most, and I think maybe you should consider too as well. Amaterasu, straight into A tier. I'm really glad this character's getting the recognition she deserves. When Poseidon was ruling the roost, she was probably the best counter, bar maybe elite, to Poseidon, because she caps the amount of incoming damage and deals with the CC he provides. So definitely against Poseidon, she's a brilliant pickup, but in most comps, she does really well. CC immunity is brilliant, and I think people are slowly starting to realize that. Silencers are winning games for people, and if you can get through those silencers, thanks to an Amaterasu, she will be winning games for you. The one issue is she doesn't apply a lot of damage. She does have a really fast attack speed, so keep that in mind when thinking, oh, maybe I should get auto attack on hit effects. but she doesn't do a lot of damage. So in some compositions, you can end up with not dead weight, because she's always going to have a useful ability, but definitely something that reduces your potential damage output, whereas something like Achilles could really augment it. So she can be a little bit of a trap character, but not enough to where I'd really consider her below the A tier. Ancient Treant, or Grover. He's going straight into B for me. I don't like Treant very much. He's okay in early rounds, and he's very good when there's no anti-heal on the table. But my problem with him is the fact that he is a melee character, which means that if you try and have him in a certain centralized location to heal all your team, he'll sometimes just walk off to go punch something. I think if he was ranged, he'd be a lot better, because you'd be able to control his location a little bit easier. And I think his other utility, which is putting him at the back as like assassin bait and just fighting the assassin, is alright, but then what he ends up doing is just healing himself and not healing the whole composition. So while he can be pretty much unkillable in the right setup, he's more often than not dead weight who doesn't provide enough damage in my eyes. Next to Grover, I think we have the worst character in game. We have Anhur. He's really rough, if you ask me. Not a character I ever like picking up. He's always a placeholder. I don't think I've ever got anything above a 1 or 2 star Anhur, and I've never brought him into late game. He has okay base stats, but that's really not enough to make a character good when the other hunters have pretty much better base stats across the board. And his stun is single target. It's lengthy, but it's single target. I think if they wanted to buff his ability, which I think is where they really have to look, maybe make it like Impale and Smite, where it knocks back an enemy unit. Or change it up altogether. He could probably do with some AoE, so give him Desert Fury from Smite, give him an AoE ultimate that goes through and hits multiple targets. Because right now, Anhur is just not good enough. He's the character I most want to see have a decent buff. Apollo, on the other hand, is perfect exactly where he is. I'm going to put him just behind Amaterasu, I think. He's a very balanced character. He does a lot of auto-attack damage. He's good with crit, lifesteal, good with on-hit effects, amazing with divine intervention, which has been nerfed and probably knocked him out of that A+ category for me, but still an incredibly good character, and one that I only pass over if there are some specific hunters on the board that I really want, or I'm going for a different sort of build. Arachne, amazing. Just basically the exact same analysis as Poach. I actually think I'm going to put her above Achilles because of her anti-heal. Same pros as Poach, maybe, lacks a disarm, but she spawns pets, great with pet comps, great at applying on-hit effects, but also applying anti-heal to the entire enemy team so well. That is undervalued in my eyes, and so I think Arachne's one of those characters where even if a lot of people are picking her up, I'll still pick her up just for that potential utility she provides. Definitely an A+ character for me, and I do just quite like pets. Artemis, she's an A now. She's been fixed, her bow now works, Tusky does what he's meant to do, stuns a target, doesn't just run into a wall. She's, again, pretty good in pet comps, and she's probably actually on a similar level of power as someone like Apollo. But for me, because Apollo is cheaper, I'd never replace an Apollo at like 2 or more stars with an Artemis. It's just not worth it. She's more expensive, and she basically does the same thing as him. So she's not bad, but I will often rather have Jing Wei or Apollo. Simple as that. Bakasura, he's an interesting character. He excels with Loki, he excels with crit chance. He can pretty much carry games if you get him early on, you get him to a high level and you get him critting very hard. But for that reason, he's pretty situational. He really needs crit. He doesn't have a ridiculously high attack speed or anything, so he's not great at applying on-hit effects. He's more all about blowing up the enemy team. And so if you're not a character that's great with on-hit effects, or you're basically not Loki, he's definitely weaker than he could be, and so I leave him in at B+. Cabrakan, another anti-heal character, something that I think is going totally ignored. He's good. He's toward the bottom of A+, I would say, but definitely still an A+ character. He's held back a little bit by the fact he can't move while ulting, but his ult is so good. He's probably the best character in no anti-heal lobbies, because not only will he apply the anti-heal, if you can get something like Living Wand on him, he basically becomes unkillable. So, really good character. He's CC immune in his ult. I think that was a good change. They reduced his damage and made him CC immune. So he's much more of a utility character now, but that's fine by me. His utility is pretty top-notch. Camazotz, probably the character closest to S, but not quite there for me. He is getting tuned down slightly, but he's got a really good ability that casts very often, and he's probably the best character at dealing with corner sitting. Him and Merlin maybe offer something similar. But if you have a corner-sitting Zeus, the Camazotz will often jump into the backline and silence out that Zeus before he can get off his really nasty CC, potential CC, and damage. I love him for that, because so many people corner camp. It's probably a dominant strategy right now, especially for the mages. But he's also just very versatile. Great with a lot of items, great with a lot of builds. A very good character. Centurion falls right in behind Amaterasu, does a very similar thing. She limits the incoming damage, whereas he actually just increases your protections, which can be better at times. It really depends what you're facing, so it really is a coin toss between these two. What I would say is a 5-star Centurion, who's granting 100% CC immunity, is better than a 5-star Amaterasu. But I would also say that a 1-star Amaterasu is probably better than a 1-star Centurion. So it depends. Centurion's a slightly less expensive and rare unit, so in that way he's better. But I think Amaterasu is probably just edged him out overall. Cerberus. He's not a bad tank. He's received a lot of buffs recently, but he's still got to go in B+ for me. The problem with Cerberus is he's got pretty good damage, he's decently hard to kill, and he now has CC immunity on his ult. Those are all really good features of a character. But he's legendary, so he's expensive. You can't get him till late game, and he's seldom worth replacing for even your common tanks if they are at a much higher unit level. For that reason, I really find him hard to get into teams. When I've had him, I've been pleasantly surprised, but I've sometimes made the mistake of switching him out for like a 4 or 5-star Ymir, and suddenly I've just lost a big part of my front line. It's not worth doing, so he's hard to fit in, but powerful when you can get him going. Up next we have Sununos. He's a popular character, I think. I'm going to put him in just ahead of Artemis and behind Apollo. I don't think he's as good with on-hit builds, but he's definitely got one of the better abilities in the game. The thing about his ability is it scales in terms of CC duration with his level. So if you can get a 5-star Sununos, it's very powerful. But if you can't, it sometimes feels like he's one of those characters that whiffs his ult or just puts it on a single target instead of putting it in the best area. And I found him to be a somewhat frustrating character. And I generally prefer the on-hit effect applying ones with slightly faster base attack speed. So that's why he's sort of in the middle of A tier for me. He's definitely good. He also deals quite nicely with corner sitting strategies. But he's not my favourite. Chak's a pretty bog standard character. He could be towards the bottom of A, but I'm going to put him towards the top of B. His ability is really good at applying on hit effects. It's a big AoE. He has okay tankiness for the early game, but he really does fall off. And unless you get a high level Chak early on that's doing a bunch of damage and has a good amount of tankiness, he will struggle. I think people maybe make the mistake of building him like a physical character as well, but he actually has incredibly slow attack speed. He's much better set up as a magical damage dealer. Chernabog, the best common unit in the game. It's really hard to argue otherwise. I'm putting him just ahead of Achilles. He has such a good ultimate. He's probably the only character in the game that I will pick up, even if there's only one of them left, because just the value of that ultimate is ridiculous. The tank destroying potential, right now it's still going through Athena's ult as well, so he's got a good counter matchup there. He's great assassin bait. He's good being set up like a mage or like a hunter, so you can easily trade him out in late game if that's something you want to do, but I'm just as happy keeping my Chernabogs, and he does great damage throughout the game. Really, really strong common unit. Definitely, probably too valuable considering his rarity. Chronos is fixed. He's not hurting his teammates. He's just going to slip in front of Artemis. I like the buff he provides to his teammates. I like the debuff he applies to the enemies. I think he's a pretty good on-hit effect carrier when it comes to abilities. It travels through the whole team fight. Definitely not bad. He's probably held back ever so slightly by his high mana costs, but he has pretty good attack speed as well, and that counteracts it somewhat. He's, I'd say, similar to Sol, but he obviously needs something like Void Silence, whereas she already applies the anti-heal. Daji, she goes right into this A tier as well. I really like her. I think if you set her up to not use her ability a lot, she's much more powerful. Her in-hands are really strong. She's great with crit, scales well with crit. She's pretty much always my backup replacement. So I rate her highly, but I think if you got her with the wrong skills and she's ulting too often, though it's good with the mana drain, it often feels like it wastes her time and just puts her in a really bad location. So she's difficult to get the most out of at all times. Discordia, she's going into A tier as well. I'm actually just going to slip her in behind Apollo, I think. She's the best counter bar none to Loki. She can basically turn Loki on his teammates and make them blow each other up. It's ridiculous. She's so good against crit or in-hand comps, and she actually fits nicely on any composition because her form of CC is great. Even if the enemies are not hurting each other very much, they're still wasting their time and not focusing on you. So she's got a brilliant ability, and I think she's maybe not picked up enough, especially in those scenarios where you're struggling against high crit opponents. Dryad, she goes in just ahead of Grover for me. I think she is better than him just because she's ranged. Simple as that. It lets you position her a little bit more consistently. I find that she ults a little bit faster and gets it off a little more frequently, but she has all the same failings as he does, in that she's awful when anti-heal's on the board. 100% anti-heal and Dryad is literally doing nothing for you, so it's hard to put her above B. I've had scenarios where a CC immune Dryad has basically carried the game for me, but I've had so many others where she's felt like total dead weight. Geb is perfectly balanced. I actually think he's maybe the most balanced unit in the game. I think I put him in just ahead of Darji. He has an incredibly slow charging and slow animating ultimate, but it's balanced by the fact he's CC immune during it. It does a ridiculous amount of percentage health damage, and it's a pretty large AoE. If you can set up Geb with something like Mega Mana Potion, put him at the front or even the back of the fight, you can easily stun out the opponent's front line, do percentage damage, or stun out the assassins that come on your back line. He's really powerful, but to some extent he does kind of want that setup, and I think because he's quite a popular unit, you often end up with just a level 1 Geb which doesn't have enough tankiness and gets blown off before his ult goes off, so that's what balances him out. Guan Yu, this is a character that isn't balanced. I'm actually going to put him in ahead of Agni, one of the two characters I think that are more powerful than Agni. Guan Yu's amazing with on-hit effects. He's amazing with crit. With crit chance and crit damage, he can actually basically one-shot the entire enemy team because I think he hits 7 enemies at once. He is one of the hardest carries in the game. Ridiculously good unit, pretty popular. He's obviously legendary as well. And I think the reason why he edges it out for me over Agni is just the fact he's got that little bit more innate tankiness, so the odds of him getting his ult off feel a little bit higher. He's also better with something like Clarity, which is, I think, pretty good on Guan Yu. Hachiman, he's falling in at B. I think in the past I've underrated him and probably had him down with Anhur in C. But he also applies CC immunity, which is pretty good. And it's CC immunity even when he's a level 1 unit. But he's a hunter, so you kind of want him behind your back line, or your front line, I should say. So it's hard to get it in on that front line and really CC immune them up. So that's one of his weaknesses and why I think he's worse than Centurion and Amaterasu. But he's definitely not that bad. He's not got bad base stats. I think originally I just really undervalued the characters that didn't have damaging abilities. Hades. Hades is the best Soul Cleaver carrier in the game, in my opinion. He's such a good common unit if you get something like that early on. But he also just has a lot of good synergies. For me, he sits in around Discordia. Probably just behind her because he is a common unit and he can fall off and get blown up in the late game. How you play your Hades is pretty important, whether you keep him in the back line or in the front line, because he can be tanky early on. It's pretty huge how you choose to actually utilize him and build him. But yeah, he's ridiculously good with Silence, with Soul Cleaver, with Void, all those on-hit effects. And don't forget, his ability actually does reduce incoming damage. So, especially in the early game, that can really pay out and win you some fights. I just think that like positioning is the most important thing about Hades, so if you underutilize him, he can feel pretty useless. Hebo, he's another balanced character, straight into A. He's a character who, I think he's the perfect common unit because he's one that I feel comfortable replacing a lot of the time. He's a great placeholder for mage skills. But also, if I happen to keep rolling and getting more Hebos, and end up with a 5-star Hebo, he can just be excellent. He does a really good amount of damage. Because he has high base damage, he's great with crit. And I've had setups where I basically used Hebo as assassin bait. He's probably the second best assassin bait in the game behind Discordia. And what you do is you have it so someone like a Loki goes on him and immediately gives him his ult, and he might turn around, just one-shot that Loki. Crit him, done. So good like that. So he can be worth hanging on to in the late game, or like I said, just replaced out for one of the more generally powerful mages. Hou Yi, best hunter in the game, bar none. I think he's gone from being underrated to now where he's considered. He's really good. He applies on-hit effects amazingly well. He'll hit the whole enemy team, basically. He's great with crit. Just has very nice base stats. A fantastic character, and one you should pretty much always look to pick up. There are a few characters, hunters especially, that I will not replace with Hou Yi in the late game. He's a proper carry. Hun Batz. I think I'm going to put him actually behind Bo in A, towards the bottom end of A. Hun Batz he's got a very good crowd control ultimate, but I think the popularity, or the increasing popularity of Centurion and Amaterasu is weakening him slightly, and his ultimate just doesn't do a lot of damage and takes a long time to charge up. So if you're not getting the CC from it, it's doing basically nothing. So I think Hun Batz is probably the closest character to slipping down into B+, so he's the one that I'm probably going to keep the closest eye on in the next few days. But he's definitely not a bad pickup for an epic unit. Izanami, sort of the other side of Hun Batz. I think she is in B+, because she needs certain items to really pop off. For example, she's pretty good with Divine Intervention. She's pretty good with additional hits, or hits hitting multiple enemies at once, because she has very high base damage, but very low attack speed for a hunter. So when built the right way, she can be huge, do ridiculous amounts of damage. Her crits are massive as well, obviously. But at the same time, she doesn't apply on-hit effects very well. And I've often found situations where I've been stuck with a level 1 as an army and she just gets blown up after auto-attacking once and isn't getting nearly enough off. But if items do change and we kind of can build to set up for particular characters more, and it becomes more consistent in terms of getting Izanami, she could easily see herself up in A or even A+, because I have seen times where Izanami has single-handedly carried games. Jing Wei, she's a much more consistent character. I'm putting her in, I think, just ahead of Cabrakan, just behind Alpwatch. A+ is going to end up pretty busy, I think. It's a pretty solid tier for a lot of characters. Jing Wei is really good. She is good assassin bait. She has the highest range in the game, which I think maybe goes undervalued. You can just put Jing Wei in the corner and she will pretty much still hit the enemy from anywhere. And her ability confuses the hell out of assassin AI for one reason or another. And actually it does damage. I think people undervalue that. It does damage, which means it applies on hit effects. I've had a time where I was using Jing Wei as an astral carrier, just as a placeholder, and I actually crit multiple times with astral in one game and did a ridiculous amount of damage with it. So keep that in mind. Her ability damage is okay. She's also really good with devotion, cast very frequently. Next up we have Kali. She's pretty much the other side of the coin for Darji. She's more of a magical damaging assassin, and I think some people are making the mistake of building her like she's a physical. Now, she's okay with physical skills, especially as a placeholder, but really what you want to do is accentuate that ultimate ability, because it's really good. It's channeled over time, which means if you get something like a silence on it, you can silence for a duration, you can disarm for a duration, and it does pretty good damage. She's another character that's pretty good with magical crit. Build her the right way, and you will get a lot more out of her. Kukulkan, a character who I think merits the B category, maybe just ahead of the healers, because he's a little more consistent than they are. Kukulkan's ability got buffed, and it is pretty good if you ask me. He knocks up one target, falls down, and does damage in a radius. It's not a lot of damage, it also strips protections, but the thing about it is it applies on-hit effects, so he's actually surprisingly good with on-hit effect builds. The other thing about Kukulkan is, and the same thing with Ymir, and we'll get onto that later, they're probably two of the least popular characters in the game, and so there's some of the characters that I find getting myself to level 4 or 5 most consistently on. If that's the case, they're still tanks. They scale really well in health and tankiness, and because of how powerful Narcissus Mirror or Hades Hot Hands are right now, give them those items, they will carry the game for you. So I think by proxy of being unpopular, Kukulkan is actually a much better god. But if more people start to realize he's a better god because he's unpopular, he will start to fall down again. It's one of those weird things with the way the auto battle mechanics are. So for right now, I think he sits pretty well in B. Khepri, on the other hand, he's up in A. He's up with Geb here. I think probably marginally better than Geb, just because Khepri's a little tankier than Geb. He's actually the tankiest character in the game. And again, like I mentioned, mirror, reflection, really strong right now. If you can get that on a Khepri, it will be powerful. Khepri's ultimate is also pretty good if it gets on a leader or a good target, but one of my issues with his ultimate is it's kind of inconsistent who it goes for. He's bad with pets, and you can see how high I value pet pet characters like Arachne and Alpuach, so I don't like that sort of negative synergy. So he sits pretty much at that perfectly balanced A spot, despite that incredible tankiness. If you need tankiness on your team, Khepri is probably the best pickup in the game. I'm back, sorry for that slight interruption. We were just about to start talking about King Arthur, who is going straight into that S tier. Arthur has one of the absolute best ultimates in the game. It has a very high mana cost, which is why he kind of is towards the bottom of S, because sometimes you'll find him getting silenced out or shut down before he can get it off. But if you have like a Clarity or Wizard Hat setup on Arthur, he can just take 2 targets out of the fight and kill him. The way I think they believe he's balanced is because his animation time's really long, but he's also totally damage immune while he's up there. So it's not like he's in any real trouble while he's ulting. I really think Arthur is probably the most frustrating character in the game to play against and to play with sometimes. I don't like him. I would like to see him nerfed, but he's definitely not the best character because he can be shut down. But still, an incredible ultimate and one that can totally ruin fights for you. He's so good if you have a tanky composition that's struggling to get particular kills, because he'll just execute their highest health targets. And playing around King Arthur can sometimes mean changing up your entire build, and that feels really bad. Next up, Kukul. We have another S tier character. Probably marginally better than King Arthur. Another good Clarity carrier. He's got massive burst. He's very similar to Agni. I do think Agni's marginally better just because he has a slightly wider AoE. He's a little more consistent with it. Kukul can just have bad ults sometimes. But even so, his ult carries CC, so it's a knock-up. Disrupts the team fights, can apply everything amazingly well. He's really good. Basically, every bit of analysis I gave Agni is exactly the same for Kukul. Don't replace him for someone like a Hunter when you really need that consistent damage, because it may be the case that your Kukul just won't get his ult off. But if he does get it off, expect incredibly good things. Medusa, she's sort of slipped down in my estimation. I think she's a little bit worse than Izanami and maybe Chak and probably Baka. I think sort of towards the middle of B+ for me. She has a good ultimate. The stun is pretty good, and I like the passive that she does more damage to CC targets. You know, she has innate synergy with Opportunist, but that synergy with what is probably now the worst skill in the game. I don't really rate her base stats, and I feel like some hunters that have very long animation times like she does obviously nerfs their ability to apply on-hit basic attack effects. It's a little bit like Skadi summoning the dog. Sometimes I wish Skadi would just keep attacking. But even so, she's not a bad character, but she's definitely not my favourite hunter. I think B+ is a fair place to put her. Merlin's another really balanced character. I'm going to put him just ahead of Hades. They do very similar things. I think Merlin's one of the characters I most frequently replace Hades with. Merlin isn't an amazing damage dealer. He's alright with crit, same as Hades. But what Merlin's really good for is applying AoE in an extended radius. Because his ability stays down for so long, it's going to do a lot of CC over a duration. And if you can get that into a corner camping strat, like a Zeus, it can do a lot of work. But like, that's not to undervalue the amount of damage the character can do. He's also pretty good with healing. I think mages with lifesteal are kind of underrated because of their potential ability, lifesteal. So keep an eye out for that. Merlin, pretty much just a balanced character. Definitely not overpowered. Has a pretty high mana cost for his ability. And I think because he doesn't have that same niche application as Discordia, I put him in just behind her. But right in the middle of A seems fair enough to me. Minotaur, another tanky character who I like. I think he's around the Geb placement. This is a tanky character, though, that hits incredibly hard. You get a Minotaur early on with Loki and maybe get some crit damage or fire on him. He will hit so hard. He's great with the teleport as well. His ability isn't amazing. It's a single target stun. But it can be good assassin lockdown if you use him as assassin bait. I just think he's a really all-around balanced character. The same way I said Hebo is a pretty good common unit, does exactly what he needs to, can be easily replaced. I think Minotaur is very similar. Ends up with similar stats to like Karkadan or Ymir, but does more damage and has probably a more consistent CC than the both of them. So he's in A. Pele. Pele is the best character in the game, in my opinion. Her ultimate's crazy. It'll hit the entire fight. It kind of feels like a Kukul ult with maybe just a little bit more width on the radius. It'll apply all sorts of effects. And I've had situations where it's basically just one-shotting the entire enemy team. She was bugged for a while, which is why she was taken out the game during one of the tournaments. But now she's back. She's back with a vengeance. She is so strong. Don't build her auto-attack. She does scale fine in that, but build her for that ability damage and to get that ultimate off as often as possible, because she's just basically Guan Yu but an assassin. And because she's an assassin, I find that her application and her target selection is just that little bit more controllable and a little bit stronger. And that's why, to me, she's the best character in the game. Raijin. Raijin is also really good. I think he's similar to Merlin, but definitely better than Merlin. He's got a lower ultimate cost. His ability stays on the floor for a similar amount of time, but I think it does more damage over that duration. And he's another character that's amazing with stuff like Living Wand and Lifesteal and can heal himself up. I like tanky Raijin. I think he's a really good frontliner. That low mana cost, getting that ability off really early and then healing himself up to full and maintaining himself at full. But obviously he's also great with other on-hit effects. Does lots of damage. Pretty much, he's probably my favourite mage. I think I prefer him to Agni or Kukul, just because I've had more positive experiences with him because he's not as rare a character. So definitely look to pick up Raijin in your next game. Such a good mage. Rama, I think he's been slightly overrated in time, but he's definitely not a bad character. He's probably somewhere around where Jing Wei sits. Probably marginally above. He's legendary. He's going to be more expensive. I would replace a 1-star Jing Wei with a 1-star Rama, absolutely. His ultimate doesn't do ability damage, it's physical damage, so he actually can like lifesteal to full with his ultimate. That's really good. He's also silence immune, so he can always get into that ultimate, and then when he's in it, he's totally damage immune. I think he's actually got quite a nice synergizing kit. His ability actually does critical damage, so he synergizes with that as well. A really good character, but he's not on the same level as Hou Yi. Definitely not. But definitely probably, third or fourth best hunter in the game. Set. Set's an interesting character. Your mileage will vary with Set. He's cool, but he's another legendary like Cerberus where he needs a lot to get going, and he's not a character that I'll replace my assassins for all that frequently. I don't think I'll often trade out a Darji for a Set. I might if they're both 1-star, but it's not a guaranteed choice, whereas it pretty much is with a lot of the other legendaries. Set's incredible with Hera, and he's incredible when he can get a lot of ads off and you're very tanky. He's also very good with Narcissus Mirror because of that, and so he has some really, really top-tier synergies. But because he's legendary, it's even harder to get those synergies off. It's even less likely you'll get that perfect run where you end up with that. So for that reason, he stays in B+ for me, towards the bottom end as well, just because of that total inconsistency I feel with the character. A consistently good character, though, is Skadi. A tier, right at the top of A tier, just behind those CC immune guys, just ahead of Apollo. She has the fastest base attack speed in the game, I believe. It's up there with Amaterasu, actually. Her dog will also apply on-hit effects, so she is just the on-hit effect applying character. Ridiculously good with even the nerfed Bonfire Bow, with Thunder, with Ice. A really good character. She's a common unit too. I don't think she's as good as Chernabog, because I don't think she translates as well into late game, but she's still crazy good. Super high attack speed is better than super high damage. She and Izanami are basically the two opposites of each other, and I definitely think Skadi is a much more consistent character with attack speed as opposed to damage. Just keep in mind that her damage is really bad, so don't build her with something that gives her percentage increases in damage. Build her with something that buffs her damage directly. Next up, Sobek. This is a character that's been incredibly overpowered in the past, but for me now, he's just towards the bottom of A+, and I'm going to keep an eye on him and see maybe whether he drops down to A. I've had some frustrations with Sobek, because if you play characters with big AoE ultimates like Poseidon, you can end up with your Sobek throwing a prime target out of the Kraken, the one that you really want to hit, and actually causing problems for your own backline. So he can be a bit of a hindrance, if you ask me. The only thing I would say with him is his disruption is incredible. He will cast a lot, and his damage is actually kind of underrated as well. So that's why he still stays up in A+, but he's definitely teetering on the edge for me. The other thing about Sobek I would say is his popularity seems to have gone down, so I found it easier to get higher tiered Sobeks. And if you play him really smartly and you have him towards the front of your setup with someone who's maybe not the best assassin bait at the back, you can have him such that he will pluck the assassin off your back line immediately, and that can be really powerful. Next up we have Sol. She's in A based on the fact she's an anti-healer. I think maybe just ahead of Hebo. I don't like her ability. I don't feel like it's a big enough AoE. And in terms of the other two anti-healers, they apply it in a much more consistent area. Arachne obviously just spawns more spiders to do it, and Cabrakan has a large AoE. So I don't love her for that, but just if there is an anti-heal lobby, a no anti-heal lobby, she just becomes a bit of a necessity pickup. And she's not bad in other comps. She's still a mage. She'll still do the damage. So I think A is a fair place to put Sol. Sun Wukong's a character I struggle with. I really dislike him. I feel like he doesn't get enough done. He wastes a lot of time, and he could be a good character to get you a draw, especially if you build him very tanky or with block or something like that. He can do his job, but I've found him to be very inconsistent. One interesting feature, I think, is if you have Hades' hot hands on him and enemies are attacking you while you're up in the cloud, I think your Hades' hot hands can still apply. So he's one of the better carriers of that item, but that synergy is not consistent enough for me to say he's anything above B. I know some people think he's balanced, and he's not a character that I avoid as much as some of the others, around him, but he just really isn't powerful. Really not a powerful god at all. Ullr. I think probably the only character in B+ that's better than Izanami, but isn't quite in A. Ullr's another character that can really excel with certain setups. His lifesteal's great if there's not a lot of anti-heal, if you pick him up with Thanatos. But and he's also good assassin bait because he tends to pull the assassin into the backline and then jump into the opponent's backline. I like his design. I think it's really cool design, a little bit like Camazotz. But I just don't feel like his base stats carry him enough, and I generally would rather have the other hunters that I've put above him. Your Apollos, even your Artemises, your Sununoses. So he fits a niche, and so shouldn't be ignored, which is why I've got him at the top of B+. But he's definitely not one for every comp. Xing Tian. He's a character that's been frustrating me a little bit as an opponent, but I don't think I can put him much higher up than B+, because he's another one of those legendary units that just doesn't get going fast enough, and it's similar to Cerberus. I kind of like him, but I find him hard to fit in. His AoE will knock enemies back and stun them, and the problem with that is it's good at clearing them off your backline, but it's bad for setting up for AoE damage. So sometimes there's some counter synergy there, a little bit like Sobek, but he doesn't have half as much damage and consistency as Sobek, so I think he's okay, but he's definitely not up there in that A balance spot. Ymir, sadly one of the worst characters in the game. He's not as bad as Anhur, and as I mentioned before with Karkadan, because he's unpopular, you can often level him up quite easily, and a 5-star anything can still be powerful. But his ability is just awful. It charges way too slowly. It's so often single target, even though it is an AoE. And I often just find he dies before he gets it off. Really not a good character, other than the fact that you can build him tanky and put some reflect damage on him. And finally, the last character to talk about is Zhong Kui. I like Zhong Kui. He's another character that's really good with Living Wands. I think more people need to make use of it. And he does a very similar thing to Merlin and Hades, so I think I'm just going to slot him right there in between the two. But my problem with Zhong Kui is that he often won't move with the ghosts, so he ends up a little bit stuck like Cabrakan. And not doing as much as he possibly could. But because he's got an AoE attack that lasts over a duration, he's great with CC. Like I said, he's great at healing himself up to full with a Living Wand. And he does provide a little bit more of that tankiness and frontline. And don't forget, he has a protection shred. I think that those additional effects of abilities are so often ignored. If you're having a really hard time up against a tanky team, protection shreds are really good. And Zhong Kui is a character that carries one. Yeah, he's probably just a balanced character, I would say. Some characters use him better than others. I think he's very good with Zeus. He's a pretty good bodyguard for Zeus as well. And also, don't forget, as long as he casts his ultimate, it will remain on the floor. So if you can CC enemies into his ultimate, it will still be doing its full damage even if Zhong Kui is long since dead. So there's some worth to him there as well. And that's it. Wow, I've been talking for a long time. My throat is incredibly dry. This is difficult to do. I kept the video around 40 minutes. That's not too bad. Hopefully you've enjoyed. I really want some feedback on this one, guys. So if you could, leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think. I worry a little bit about my system. Maybe there's some bias but for legendary characters, I'm looking now, and 6 of the 6 S tier characters are legendaries, but I suppose that shouldn't come as a massive surprise. They really are quite powerful characters. And other than that, I'm really happy with the tier list. So you guys let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. I'm going to do my very best to discuss item tier lists and trait tier lists, but I do think that's even more subjective. But I'm going to see if I can find a sort of efficient way to do that analysis. Thanks again. I'll see you all in the next one.